My name is Elizabeth Elliot, and I am 22 now, but this story begins when I was 18. It begins on the day my life was supposed to end, thrown away like so much baggage by the only family I had ever known. And yet, this is not a story of tragedy. This is the story of how being offered up to a pirate captain to save the miserable skins of my relatives was the greatest and most liberating moment of my entire existence. It's the story of how the man who came to rescue me, a celebrated hero of the Royal Navy, was the one who was truly lost, and how I, the unwanted girl, found my own map to a life I never could have imagined. What would you do if the people who were supposed to protect you were the very ones who pushed you into the heart of danger? Before I dive into the salt spray and cannon smoke of this story, I want to welcome you here. Let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from today. It's incredible to think of how far stories can travel, and if you've ever been made to feel small, or like you didn't belong, hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. For all the new faces here, consider subscribing to join a community of people who understand that sometimes the family you choose is the only one that truly matters. My world, for the first 18 years of my life, was defined by its smallness. I was an orphan, a fact my Aunt Matilda and Uncle Barnaby never allowed me to forget. My parents had been lost to a fever when I was just a toddler, leaving me as a ward to my father's only brother. To them, I was not a daughter, not even a niece in any meaningful sense. I was a duty, a charity case, a line item in the ledger of their lives that they resented with a quiet, simmering poison that permeated every corner of their London townhouse. The air in that house was always thick with the scent of boiled cabbage and unspoken grievances. The journey that would change everything was aboard the merchant vessel Sea Serpent. Uncle Barnaby had secured a minor but respectable administrative post in the colonies, a move he framed as a grand new chapter for the Elliot family. For me, it was just a change of cage. From the moment we boarded, my status was made clear. My cousin Percival, a boy whose cruelty was matched only by his stunning lack of imagination, was given a spacious cabin with a window overlooking the sea. My aunt and uncle had the adjoining suite. I was given a space little bigger than a closet, deep in the belly of the ship, where the air was stale with the smell of bilge water and tar. "It will suffice for you, Elizabeth," Aunt Matilda had said, not looking at me, her gaze fixed on a loose thread on her glove. "You require little in the way of comfort." It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact, as unchangeable as the tides. My days on the ship were a mirror of my days on land. I rose before dawn to help the ship's cook, not because I was asked, but because it was expected. I mended Percival's torn shirts, polished my uncle's boots, and spent hours brushing the tangles from my aunt's thinning hair, my arms aching as she criticized every stroke. I was a ghost in their lives, a pair of hands, a silent presence they could command. Once, I had found a quiet corner on the deck to read a worn copy of a book on celestial navigation, a secret passion of mine. I was tracing the constellations with my finger when Percival snatched it from my hands. "What's a girl like you doing with this nonsense?" he sneered, his lip curling. "You'll be navigating a kitchen your whole life, not the stars." He tossed the book overboard, and I watched its pages flutter and then sink into the churning, indifferent blue of the Atlantic. I didn't cry. Crying only ever earned me his mockery and my aunt's irritation. I simply stood there, feeling a cold, hollow space open inside my chest where the dreams of the stars had been. That was my life, a series of small deaths, of quiet extinguishments, until I wasn't sure how much of me was even left to burn out. The sea was calm for weeks, a tedious, rolling expanse of blue that mirrored the monotony of my existence. Then one afternoon, the cry came from the crow's nest. "Sail off the port bow. Black flag." Panic erupted on the deck like a flock of startled gulls. Passengers screamed and ran for cover. My uncle Barnaby, who had always puffed out his chest and spoken of British fortitude, turned a shade of pale gray I'd never seen before. He grabbed Matilda and Percival, shoving them behind a stack of crates. He only remembered me when my aunt hissed my name. "Elizabeth, get over here. Make yourself useful." Useful, I thought numbly. How? By being a shield. The pirate ship, the Revenant, was a thing of brutal beauty. It was sleek and black, cutting through the water with a predatory grace. It came alongside us with a horrifying speed, and the sounds that followed would be etched into my memory forever. The splintering crack of grappling hooks biting into the wood of our ship's railing, the guttural roar of men swarming aboard, the sharp, terrifying report of pistols. I was huddled with my family, my body trembling not with fear for myself, but with a strange, detached curiosity. This was something new, something other than the slow, grinding misery of my daily life. The pirate captain was the center of the storm, a vortex of calm in the chaos he had unleashed. He wasn't the wild-eyed beast of sailors' tales. He was tall and lean, with hair as black as his ship's flag, tied back from a face that was all sharp angles and shadows. His eyes, a startlingly clear gray, missed nothing. He moved with an easy confidence, his worn leather coat swirling around him as he surveyed the terrified passengers of the Sea Serpent. His name, we would learn later, was Kalen, but on that day, he was simply the embodiment of absolute power. Your cargo, your coin, your jewels, he said, his voice a low rumble that carried effortlessly over the whimpers of the captured. Place them on the deck, cooperate, and you may live to see port. My uncle, his face slick with sweat, scrambled to obey. He ripped the watch from his waistcoat, pulled the rings from his fingers, and ordered my aunt to do the same. They piled their wealth onto a small, pathetic mound on the deck. Kalen glanced at it, then back at them, a faint, contemptuous smile playing on his lips. "Is this all the great Elliot family values?" he asked, the question laced with mockery. He had clearly heard of my uncle's new appointment. "I find that disappointing. I prefer to take something a person will truly miss, something of value." His gray eyes swept over our small, cowering group. They passed over me, then over Percival, then settled on my Uncle Barnaby's terrified face. For a moment, a truly horrifying moment, I thought he was going to take Percival. I saw the flash of terror in my aunt's eyes, a primal fear I had never seen her display for anyone or anything else. And in that moment of pure, selfish terror, my Aunt Matilda found her cruel inspiration. Her eyes, hard and cold as pebbles, landed on me. It happened so fast. One moment I was kneeling behind her, the next her hand was on my shoulder, shoving me forward so hard I stumbled and fell to my knees on the rough wood of the deck. I looked up, bewildered, into the pirate captain's unreadable gray eyes. "Take her," my aunt said, her voice high and strained, but filled with a desperate, ugly resolve. "She is of value to us. A ward, but she's strong, a hard worker. She can serve you well. Take her and leave us." The world seemed to stop. The sounds of the raid, the crying of the passengers, the roar of the sea, it all faded into a dull hum in my ears. I stared at my aunt, at the woman who was supposed to be my mother's replacement, and I saw no remorse, no hesitation. I saw only the frantic, calculating mind of an animal chewing off its own limb to escape a trap. My Uncle Barnaby, my father's own brother, said nothing. He simply stared at the deck, his jaw working silently, a portrait of pathetic cowardice. Percival, for his part, looked almost relieved. My life, my entire existence, was being traded for a few trunks of clothes and a faster route to their own safety. I was not a person, I was a bargaining chip, and I had just been played. I looked back at the pirate captain. My fear was gone, replaced by a cold, clear stillness. There was nothing left to be afraid of. The worst thing that could possibly happen to me had just happened. My own family had declared me worthless, expendable, so I did the only thing I could. I met his gaze directly. I did not cry. I did not plead. I simply held his stare, and in the depths of my eyes, I let him see the truth of what they had just done. I let him see the betrayal and the tiny, defiant spark that refused to be extinguished. A flicker of something, surprise, interest, crossed his face. He looked from my face to the pathetic figures of my relatives, and then back to me. A slow, chilling smile spread across his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. "A trade," he said, his voice soft but carrying a finality that echoed across the deck. "Very well, I accept your tribute." Two of his men stepped forward and hauled me to my feet. They were rough, their hands calloused, but there was an impersonal quality to their handling that was almost a relief after the intimate cruelty of my aunt's shove. As they dragged me towards the railing and the waiting pirate ship, I took one last look at the Finches, my family. They wouldn't meet my eyes. They were already turning away, gathering their things, their relief so palpable it was nauseating. They had saved themselves. The cost was a girl they had never wanted anyway. Life aboard the Revenant was a jarring symphony of chaos and order. The moment I was hauled over its railing and my feet hit the deck, I was no longer Elizabeth Elliot, the unwanted ward. I was the tribute, a living piece of plunder, and an object of intense curiosity for the rough-weathered men who made up Captain Kalen's crew. They stared at me with open, assessing gazes, their eyes lingering on my plain woolen dress and the neat coil of my brown hair, as if trying to calculate my worth. I expected leering, I expected cruelty, but what I found was something far more unnerving, a kind of professional indifference. I wasn't a woman to be desired, or a victim to be pitied. I was a commodity, and they were waiting to see if their captain had made a good trade. Kalen himself ignored me for the first day. He gave a sharp order to his quartermaster, a hulking man with a tangled gray beard named Quinn, to find a place for her where she won't be in the way. Quinn grunted and led me below deck, pushing me into a small, windowless storage room that smelled of canvas and rum. "Stay here," he ordered, his voice like grinding stones. "Touch nothing." He slammed the heavy door, and the bolt slid home with a deafening thud. I was a prisoner, but as I sat there in the near darkness, listening to the creak of the ship's timbers and the distant shouts of the crew, a strange feeling washed over me. It was not fear. It was a profound, hollow emptiness. I had been abandoned so completely, so utterly, that there was no one left to disappoint, no one left to try and please. For the first time in my life, I was truly terribly alone, and in that aloneness, a fragile seed of something else began to sprout. Freedom. The next morning, the bolt was drawn back, and Quinn stood there with a piece of hardtack and a tin cup of water. He shoved them at me without a word. I ate and drank, my throat dry. I had decided during the long, dark hours that I would not be a weeping, helpless victim. My family had cast me in that role, and I would not play it for these men. When Quinn came back, I stood up and met his gaze. "I am not cargo," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "If I am to be here, give me work. I will not be idle." The big man stared at me, his eyes widening in surprise. He seemed to be on the verge of laughing, but then he looked closer, and something in my expression must have given him pause. He grunted again, a sound that seemed to be his primary mode of communication, and jerked his head for me to follow. He took me to the galley, where a wiry, one-eyed cook named Silas was cursing at a pot of something that smelled suspiciously like burnt fish. "She says she wants to work," Quinn said. Silas turned his good eye on me, looking me up and down. "Can you peel a potato without slicing off your own thumb?" he asked gruffly. I nodded. "Then get to it," he said, pointing to a sack of potatoes in the corner. For the next week, I peeled potatoes, scoured pots, mended torn sails with the sailmaker, a quiet man whose hands were as gnarled as old roots, and helped the young cabin boy Finn swab the decks. The work was grueling, my hands quickly becoming raw and blistered, but it was honest work. No one sneered at my efforts. If I did a job well, Silas would give a curt nod of approval. If I mended a sail properly, the sailmaker would show me a more efficient stitch. It was a world of simple cause and effect, a world without the shifting, impossible emotional landscape of my aunt's moods. Here, my worth was measured in the quality of my labor, and I found I could meet that measure. I saw Captain Kalen often, but he rarely spoke to me. He would watch me from the quarterdeck, his gray eyes narrowed in thought. I felt like a puzzle he was trying to solve. What did he see? The quiet girl who worked without complaint? The tribute who had not shed a single tear? One evening I was coiling a loose rope on the deck as the sun set, painting the sky in violent streaks of orange and purple. He approached me silently. "The Elliot family paid a handsome price for their lives," he said, his voice startlingly close. I kept my eyes on my work. "They paid nothing, Captain," I replied, my voice low. "They simply discarded something they had no use for." He was silent for a long moment. "And do you have a use?" he asked. The question hung in the air between us. It wasn't a threat. It was a genuine inquiry. I finally looked up at him. I am learning to be useful to myself, I said. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Good, he said, and walked away. Meanwhile, a different story was unfolding hundreds of miles away. The battered sea serpent had finally limped into a British naval port in the Caribbean. My Uncle Barnaby, a master of self-preservation, had concocted a heroic tale for the authorities. He spoke of a brutal surprise attack, of his valiant but ultimately futile attempts to fight off the pirates. And then, with tears in his eyes, he told them of the tragic climax. The savage pirate captain, a monster named Blackheart Kalin, had ripped his beloved gentle niece from his arms, laughing as he dragged her away to a fate worse than death. Barnaby Elliott became a tragic figure, a man who had lost everything. He was lauded for his bravery. My aunt played the part of the grieving guardian to perfection, dabbing at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. This story, this carefully crafted lie, reached the ears of Captain Ralph Thorne of His Majesty's ship Valiant. Thorne was a legend in the Royal Navy, a man spoken of in hushed, reverent tones. He was brilliant, uncompromising, and driven by a code of honor so rigid it left no room for moral ambiguity. To him, the world was simple. There was the law, and there were those who broke it. There was good, and there was evil, and pirates were the purest form of evil he knew. The story of the abducted Elizabeth Elliot ignited a fire in his soul. It was the ultimate crime, an attack on innocence, an affront to civilization itself. He saw me in his mind's eye, a delicate English rose, brutalized and terrified, waiting for a savior. I became his quest, his crusade, but a seed of doubt was planted by a quiet witness, a merchant traveling on the sea serpent. A man who had seen my aunt shove me forward, spoke quietly to one of Thorne's junior officers. He recounted the event not as an accusation, but as a confusing, disturbing detail. The officer, loyal to his captain, reported it to Thorne. He says they offered the girl, sir, as a trade. Thorne dismissed it at first. It was unthinkable. No civilized person, no Briton, would do such a thing. It had to be a misunderstanding, the ramblings of a man addled by fear. And yet, the idea took root in the corner of his mind. The discrepancy was an irritant, a piece of the puzzle that didn't fit. It made the story more compelling, the injustice more profound. Whether I was taken or given, my fate was the same. I was a victim who needed rescuing. He went before his admiral and made a vow. He would hunt Blackheart Kalin to the ends of the earth. He would retrieve the lost girl and see justice done. His pursuit was not just a mission, it became an obsession. The HMS Valiant was one of the fastest ships in the fleet, and Thorne was its most relentless commander. He would not fail. The first sign we had of the pursuit was a distant sail on the horizon that appeared one morning and was still there by evening, then again the next morning, closer this time. Kalin studied it through his spyglass for a long time, his jaw tight. "The Valiant," he said to Quinn, his voice grim. "Thorne." A ripple of unease went through the crew. They all knew the name. The mood on the Revenant shifted. The easy rhythm of our days was replaced by a taut, nervous energy. We were no longer hunters, we were the hunted. Kalin began pushing the ship and the crew to their limits, changing course erratically, using every trick he knew to shake our pursuer. But the Valiant was relentless, a white shark tracking our every move. It was during this time that my role on the ship began to change. One night, Kalin found me in his cabin. He hadn't summoned me. I had gone there to return a mended chart case. His maps were spread out across his large oak table, a maze of islands and coastlines. He was staring at them, a deep frown line etched between his brows. "He's gaining on us," he said, not looking up. "Thorne knows these waters as well as I do." I stepped closer, my eyes drawn to the charts. I had spent years of my secret, lonely life devouring books on geography and exploration. The patterns of the coastlines, the names of the coves and inlets, were as familiar to me as old friends. "Not all of them," I said quietly. He looked up, his gray eyes sharp. I pointed to a small, jagged cluster of islands on the chart. "The Serpent's Coil. The book I read said the currents there are treacherous, unpredictable. The Navy avoids it. Their deep-keeled ships can't navigate the channels safely." He stared at me, then at the chart, then back at me. He began to quiz me, asking about depths, currents, prevailing winds. I answered every question, the knowledge pouring out of me, knowledge I had never had a chance to use, that Percival had deemed worthless. For the first time, someone was looking at me and seeing not a servant, not a tribute, but a mind. "You are full of surprises, Elizabeth," he said, a note of genuine respect in his voice. He made a decision then and there. We would head for the serpent's coil. From that day on, I was no longer just a worker. I was a part of the ship's brain. I spent hours in Kalen's cabin, poring over the charts with him, my initial fear replaced by a thrilling sense of purpose. He would listen to my suggestions, argue with me about strategy, and treat my opinions with a seriousness no one ever had. I began to feel a strange, fierce loyalty to this ship and its crew. They were criminals, yes, but they were also a family of outcasts, not so different from me. They had given me a place, a function. What would Captain Thorne's rescue offer me? A return trip to the Finches? To be locked away again in a world that had tried to erase me? The thought was more terrifying than any pirate. I found myself on the deck, scanning the horizon not for a savior but for the enemy. I was actively helping the Revenant evade the Royal Navy. I was no longer a victim waiting to be saved. I was choosing my side, and I had chosen the pirates. The chase stretched on for weeks, a grueling test of will and seamanship. The Valiant was a phantom on our tail, a constant pressure that frayed the nerves of the crew. Captain Thorne was relentless, predicting our moves, cutting off our escape routes, forcing us into open water where his ship's superior speed and firepower gave him the advantage. There were days we could see the details of his ship through the spyglass, the crisp white and gold of the naval uniforms, the glint of the sun off the polished brass of his cannons. He was a force of nature, a living embodiment of the implacable law that we were breaking with every breath we took. On the Revenant, rations grew short and tempers grew shorter. The men looked to Kalen, their faith in him warring with their fear of Thorne, and Kalen, in turn, began to look to me. I was no longer just an advisor. I was becoming his navigator. In the cramped, swaying cabin, surrounded by charts and the smell of ink and seawater, we became a team. He had the instincts of a lifetime at sea, and I had the meticulous knowledge gleaned from books. Together, we plotted a course through treacherous, lesser-known waters, using shallow reefs and coastal fog as our allies. "He expects us to run for open sea," I argued one evening, my finger tracing a line through a dense archipelago. "He thinks like a naval captain, rules of engagement, clear lines of battle. He won't expect us to sail into a trap." Kalen studied the chart, his expression grim. "That isn't a trap, Elizabeth. That's a graveyard. It's called the Dragon's Teeth for a reason. A graveyard is a good place to bury a hunter," I replied, my voice quiet but firm. He looked at me for a long time, his gray eyes searching my face. He was weighing the lives of his crew against the word of a girl his enemies would have called a helpless captive. "To the Dragon's Teeth, then," he said finally, a dangerous light in his eyes. "We'll see if Thorne has the stomach to follow us into hell." As we approached the infamous archipelago, the sea changed. The calm, rolling waves gave way to a choppy, violent surge as the water was forced through narrow channels between towering black rocks that jutted from the sea like broken fangs. A perpetual mist hung in the air, muffling sound and reducing visibility to a few hundred yards. The crew worked in tense silence, their eyes darting nervously from the churning water to the straining rigging. Quinn stood at the helm, his knuckles white as he wrestled with the wheel against the unpredictable currents, shouting curses at the sea. Finn, the cabin boy, was sent up to the crow's nest, his small form barely visible in the swirling fog, his young voice cracking as he called out warnings of hidden reefs. I stood on the quarterdeck beside Kalen, my hair whipping across my face, my hands gripping a spare chart I had made of the area. My stomach was a tight knot of fear and exhilaration. This was my plan. The lives of everyone on this ship rested on the accuracy of my memory, on the lines I had traced from a dusty book. "Starboard now," I would shout, my voice raw from the wind. "There's a submerged shelf of rock 200 yards off the port bow." Kalen would relay the order to Quinn, his trust in me absolute. We were a single entity, the three of us, guiding the ship through a maze designed by a malevolent god. And then, through a break in the fog, we saw it. The Valiant. Thorn had followed us. He was either braver or more foolish than we had imagined. His magnificent ship looked out of place here, a pristine work of art in a savage landscape. He was moving more slowly than we were, more cautiously, his crew taking constant depth soundings, but he was coming. The chase was over. The confrontation was at hand. Kalen gave the order to prepare for battle. The cannons were loaded. The men armed themselves with cutlasses and pistols, their fear replaced by the grim resolve of cornered animals. There was no more running. We found our ground in a small, semicircular cove, a natural amphitheater of rock that offered some protection but also blocked any further escape. The Valiant appeared at the mouth of the cove, effectively bottling us in. The sight of it, so grand and imposing, sent a fresh wave of fear through me. The gold lion figurehead on its prow seemed to sneer at our battered, weather-beaten vessel. For a moment, the enormity of what we were doing crashed down on me. We were a handful of outlaws against the full might of the British Empire. This was suicide. Then the first cannonball screamed past our mast, close enough for me to feel the heat of its passage, and crashed into the cliff face behind us, sending a shower of rock fragments down onto the deck. The battle had begun. Our own cannons answered, but we were outgunned and outmanned. The Valiant's broadsides were disciplined and devastating, tearing huge splinters from our hull and sending men screaming to the deck. The air filled with the acrid smell of gunpowder, the splintering of wood, and the shouts of the wounded. Kalen was everywhere at once, roaring orders, firing his own pistol, his face a mask of black powder and fury. I found myself helping Silas and Finn carry injured men below deck, my dress quickly becoming stained with blood. The reality of piracy, the brutal, bloody cost of this life, was laid bare before me. But there was no time for reflection. A grappling hook slammed into the railing near me, then another, and another. Thorn was not content to sink us from a distance. He was boarding. I watched in a sort of horrified awe as the naval officers and Marines, immaculate in their uniforms, began to swarm over the side. They fought with a cold, terrifying efficiency, their bayonets and sabers a stark contrast to our crew's wild, desperate swings. Captain Ralph Thorn himself led the charge. He was exactly as I had imagined him from the sailors' whispers, tall, broad-shouldered, with a square jaw and piercing blue eyes that burned with righteous conviction. He moved through the melee on our deck like an avenging angel, his saber a blur of silver, his voice ringing out with authority. "Secure the ship, find the girl, take the pirate captain alive." He saw me then. I was standing near the mainmast, having just helped Quinn reload a small swivel gun, my face smudged with soot, my hands slick with powder residue. Our eyes met across the chaos of the deck. A look of profound shock crossed his face. This was not the trembling, tear-stained victim of his imagination. He strode towards me, parrying a clumsy attack from one of our crew without even looking. His men formed a protective circle around us, separating me from the fight. "Miss Elliot? Elizabeth Elliot?" he asked, his voice breathless. "I am Captain Thorn of the Royal Navy. It's over. You are safe now." I looked at his earnest, heroic face, at the genuine relief in his blue eyes. He truly believed he was my savior. He was the hero of the story, the knight who had slain the dragon and come to rescue the captive princess. I then looked past him at the fighting still raging on the deck. I saw Kalen, his arm bleeding from a saber cut, still fighting back-to-back with Quinn against 3 Marines. I saw Finn, barely a boy, bravely trying to douse a fire that had started near the sails. These men, these outcasts and criminals, had shown me more respect and kindness in a few weeks than my own family had in 18 years. They had given me a purpose. They had given me a voice. I was not their captive. I was one of them. I turned my gaze back to the handsome, noble captain. "Safe?" I asked, and my voice came out clear and strong, cutting through the sounds of battle. "Safe from what, Captain?" "From a crew that values my mind. From a captain who listens to my counsel. You have come all this way to rescue me, to return me to a family that sold me for their own safety. Tell me, Captain Thorn, what part of that sounds like salvation to me?" Absolute, stunned silence fell over him. His jaw dropped slightly, the righteous fire in his eyes flickering with confusion. He could not process my words. They did not fit his narrative. "But you were taken," he stammered. "You are a hostage." "I was given away," I corrected him, my voice ringing with a cold fury I didn't know I possessed. "I was discarded. My life here began the day my old one ended. I am not your prize to be won, Captain. I am not a damsel to be rescued. I am home." My declaration, so loud and clear, caused a momentary lull in the fighting around us. Kalen and his men heard it. Thorne's Marines heard it. My choice was made, and it was made in public, in the heart of the battle meant to be my liberation. Kalen seized the opportunity. "You heard the lady," he roared, a wild, triumphant grin spreading across his face. "She's not with you," his cry rallied his weary men. At that very moment, as if summoned by the sheer drama of the scene, the weather turned. The sky, which had been gray and misty, opened up. A ferocious squall, a common and sudden phenomenon in the dragon's teeth, descended upon the cove. The wind howled and torrential rain began to fall, slicking the decks and reducing visibility to mere feet. It was the final piece of my plan, the unpredictable variable I had counted on. Kalen knew what to do. "Cut the lines," he yelled. His men, energized by my defiance and the sudden storm, fought with renewed vigor, pushing the Marines back towards the railing and hacking at the grappling ropes. The Revenant, free from the Valiant's grip, began to drift. Kalen grabbed my arm. "Time to go, navigator," he said, pulling me towards the helm. In the chaos of the wind and rain, we slipped away into the thickening fog, leaving Captain Thorne standing on his own deck, drenched and utterly bewildered, his perfect heroic world shattered by the one person he had crossed an ocean to save. The unwanted girl had just refused her rescue. The escape from the dragon's teeth was a frantic, desperate affair. The squall that had saved us was now our greatest enemy, threatening to dash us against the very rocks that had hidden us. But the mood on the Revenant was electric. We had faced the Royal Navy's finest and survived. We had looked into the jaws of the Empire and spat in its eye. And I, the tribute, the castaway, had been the key. As Quinn wrestled the ship back into safer waters, the crew looked at me with a new kind of respect. It was no longer curiosity, it was acceptance. I had chosen them over the world that had made them outcasts, and in doing so, I had become one of them. When the storm finally broke and the ship was secure, Kalen found me standing at the stern, watching the gray, misty wall of the archipelago disappear behind us. We were alone. The sounds of the crew making repairs were a distant, muted backdrop. He stood beside me, leaning on the railing, not speaking for a long time. The silence wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, the quiet understanding between two people who had just been through a fire together. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice low, his gaze fixed on the horizon. It was the same question he had asked before, but this time it held a different weight. He wasn't asking about my family's motives, he was asking about mine. I thought for a moment, gathering the words to explain a feeling so new and overwhelming it barely had a name. "On the sea serpent," I began, my voice steady. "I was invisible. My thoughts, my feelings, my dreams, they didn't exist to them. They were an inconvenience. When your Aunt Matilda pushed me forward on that deck, she thought she was sentencing me to death. But what she really did was set me free. She made me a person of consequence for the first time in my life. You had to decide whether to take me or not. Your men had to decide what to do with me. Captain Thorne had to decide whether to chase me. I finally mattered. I turned to look at him, at his tired, soot-stained face. You asked me if I had a use. Captain Thorne never thought to ask. He just assumed. He saw a story that he wanted to be the hero of. You saw a person. A small, wry smile touched my lips. You may be a pirate and a criminal, Captain Kalen, but you are a more honest man than any I have ever known. He absorbed my words, his gray eyes unreadable. My men will follow you now, Elizabeth, he said. Not just me. You spoke, and you changed the tide of a battle. That kind of power is rare. He pushed himself off the railing and faced me directly. This is no longer a temporary arrangement. There's a place for you on this ship, not as a tribute, not as a passenger, as our navigator, as an officer. Your share will be your own. Your word will carry weight. He held out his hand. It was a formal offer, a contract offered between equals. My heart swelled with a feeling so potent, it almost brought me to tears, a feeling of belonging. I took his hand. It was calloused and warm. I accept, I said. My old life and the girl who had lived it had vanished completely in the fog of the dragon's teeth. Far away, aboard the HMS Valiant, a different kind of reckoning was taking place. Captain Ralph Thorne was a man adrift in the wreckage of his own certainty. He had to file his report. How could he possibly explain what had happened? That he had engaged the enemy, boarded their vessel, located the hostage, and she had refused to be rescued. It was ludicrous. It flew in the face of all logic, of everything he knew about the world. His superiors would think he had gone mad. He spent days wrestling with the words, his quill hovering over the parchment. He had built his entire career, his entire identity, on a foundation of black and white morality, justice, duty, honor. But my words had introduced shades of gray he never knew existed. Safe from what, Captain? The question echoed in his mind. He had no choice but to report the truth, or at least a version of it. His official report was a masterpiece of naval understatement. It detailed the chase, the engagement in the archipelago, and the unexpectedly fierce loyalty the captive had developed for her captors, likely a result of psychological distress. He omitted the full damning text of my rejection, but he could not omit the inciting incident. He was forced to include the sworn testimony of the other passengers from the Sea Serpent, the testimony that confirmed the Finches had offered their niece as tribute. The lie my uncle had told was exposed. The story of Barnaby Elliott, the tragic hero, unraveled completely. The Admiralty was not pleased. They had risked one of their best ships and the life of its esteemed captain on what turned out to be a squalid family drama. Thorne was privately and severely reprimanded for allowing his emotions to dictate a military operation. His obsession had made the Navy look foolish. The official story was quietly buried. The consequences for the Finches were swift and devastating. Stripped of his heroic narrative, Uncle Barnaby was revealed for what he was, a contemptible coward. His colonial appointment was revoked. He, Matilda, and Percival were sent back to England in disgrace, their names whispered with scorn in the very social circles they had tried so desperately to impress. Their reputation, the thing they valued above all else, was ruined. Thorne, in his quest for justice for me, had inadvertently delivered a perfect, ruinous justice to them. But for Thorne himself, the victory was hollow. He had won, but he had lost. The clear, bright lines of his world had been irrevocably blurred. The damsel had not wanted rescuing. The dragon, it turned out, was just a man, and the knight, he was beginning to suspect, had been fighting for his own glory all along. The years that followed were written in salt and wind. I was no longer Elizabeth Elliot. On the seas of the Caribbean, I became known as Elizabeth of the Charts, navigator of the Revenant. My name was spoken with respect in the pirate havens and with a grudging admiration in the naval taverns. The story of the girl who refused the Navy's rescue had become a legend, a cautionary tale for heroes and an anthem for outcasts. I had found my family in the most unlikely of places, among a crew of men who had been thrown away by the world, just as I had been. Quinn became the gruff, protective uncle I never had. Finn grew from a boy into a young man under my tutelage, and I taught him to read the stars, just as I had always dreamed of doing. My relationship with Kaylin deepened into something that defied easy labels. It wasn't the sweeping romance of the novels my aunt used to read. It was quieter, stronger. It was a partnership forged in crisis and tempered by mutual respect. We were two solitary souls who had found our anchor in each other. We argued over charts, we planned our ventures together, and sometimes, on quiet nights under a canopy of brilliant stars, we would share stories of the lives we had left behind. He had also been an orphan, a boy who had run away to sea to escape a cruel master. We were two sides of the same coin, and on the deck of the Revenant, we had built a kingdom of our own. One day, in a bustling port, we heard news from a merchant newly arrived from England. He spoke of a disgraced family named Elliot, living in obscurity in a damp corner of London, their son a bitter, low-level clerk. I listened to the story of their downfall, and I felt nothing, not joy, not pity, not even the sweet taste of revenge. They were ghosts from another life, a story about someone else. Their power over me was so completely gone that their fate was as meaningless as the weather on the other side of the world. The same merchant had another piece of news, a bit of naval gossip. A brilliant captain named Ralph Thorne had resigned his commission a year or so after the incident in the Dragon's Teeth. He had apparently become disillusioned, quiet, and introspective. He had used his savings to buy a small cottage on the coast and had become a cartographer. He was spending his days mapping the treacherous, unknown corners of the world, the very places where the lines were not so clear. I hoped, with a genuine sincerity that surprised me, that he had found some peace in his charts. Perhaps in drawing his new maps, he was finding a new way to understand the world. Tonight, the sea is calm, and a full moon lays a silver path across the water. I stand at the helm of the Revenant, my hand resting lightly on the wheel. Kalen is asleep below, and the ship is my responsibility. The night is quiet, save for the gentle creak of the timbers and the soft sigh of the wind in the sails. I look up at the infinite, glittering expanse of the sky. The stars that Percival said I would never navigate are now my guides, my constant companions. It's funny, isn't it? My family thought my value was so little they could trade me for their lives. Captain Thorne thought my value was so great he would cross the world for it. Both of them were wrong. They were trying to write my story, to cast me as a character that served their own narrative. One made me a burden, the other a victim. My real life began when I ripped up their scripts and started writing my own. They thought they were throwing me to the wolves, but they only taught me how to run with the pack. The greatest prison isn't a locked room or a pirate ship, it's the cage of other people's expectations. The day I was abandoned was the day I was truly found. And so, that's my story. It's a strange one, I know, but it's mine. I wanted to share it with all of you to say that your worth is not something that is given to you by others. It's something you own. It's inherent. And sometimes the most terrifying moments in our lives, the moments where we feel the most lost, are actually the moments we are being given a map to a place we were always meant to be. I would love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever had a moment that you thought was the end, but it turned out to be a new beginning? Your stories give strength to all of us. Please don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on our future journeys together. Remember, family is not about blood. It's about who is willing to fight alongside you in the storm. Thank you so much for listening. I wish you all fair winds and calm seas on your own voyages.